Hear me? Okay. So I want to welcome everyone to this panel discussion on the strategic implications of the Chinese investment in Piraeus. The timing of this event could hardly be any better. It has been claimed that 2020 will be the year of Europe for China. There are so many things going on at the moment. There are so many initiatives gathering momentum, and to discuss all these issues, very important issues, through the prism of Piraeus and the role that Piraeus can play on this EU-China connectivity map, we have with us here today a group of experts. I will first call Dr. Charalambos Tsardanidis, Director of the Institute of International Economic Relations, to the podium. Mr. Tsardanidis, the floor is yours.
Welcome remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Institute of International Economic Relations, I would like to begin by extending a very warm welcome to our distinguished guests from abroad. Your contributions will bring a range of important and valuable perspectives to the conference proceedings. I extend to you also our warmest welcome, especially to those who managed to come under this difficult day. We are very pleased that you are able to join us for this event. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, as I mentioned, on behalf of the Institute of International Economic Relations, to assist in opening this conference. May I say that the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung had again demonstrated its commitment and expertise in bringing this conference to life, working with us at the Institute to bring together impressive speakers to address an equally impressive range of topics dealing with the Chinese investment in Greece, and especially this one of COSCO in Piraeus. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world of globalization. The extent and speed with which innovation in one country cross borders through exchanges of goods, capital, and idea is unprecedented. We cannot stop this process. China's opening to the world and its emergence as a major growing industrial power is one of the most significant and positive global developments in the past 25 and more years. A prosperous and outward-looking China is a vital component of international security system and global economic prosperity. And it is one from which Greece stands to be a significant beneficiary. Strengthening and deepening trade and economic relations with China is and should remain a major priority for the Greek economic diplomacy. Greece has been well placed to benefit from China's rapid economic expansion due to its geopolitical and geoeconomic location. The overall aim of the conference is to stimulate us to give some thought to the opportunities and challenges of improving the Greek economic and business links with China. The Institute of International Economic Relations pays special attention to East Asia since the mid-90s and has set a special research unit for East Asia. It has published a series of reports and occasional papers on China. It participates also in international networks like the European Think Tank Network on China, ETNC. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to take the opportunity to express our deepest sympathy to the People's Republic of China is going through due to this coronavirus epidemic. We do hope that the Chinese people will find the strength to overcome this challenge as soon as possible. With that, I'd like to join you all to discuss and debate the issues of this fabulous agenda with the brilliant speakers and panelists. I sincerely hope you will enjoy today the debate. Thank you all for your presence and participation.
And now Mr. Henry Bonnet, Director of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Office in Greece and Cyprus, will take the floor.
Thank you. Kalispera. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. I'm Henry Bonnet, the Director of the Adenauer Foundation in Athens. As you might know, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is a German foundation close to the governing party of the CDU of Chancellor Angela Merkel in Germany. Our main aim is to promote European values and put them into practice here in Greece and together with our partners. Today we are here to talk about China. And China is daily in our news, as everybody knows, not only since the outbreak of the coronavirus, but also long before. Europe is registering China's economic rise and growing political influence with a mix of wonder, amazement, and apprehension. In today's globalized world, the most populous country on earth is, despite the geographic distance, affecting our daily lives, be it on the products we buy, the infrastructure we use, or the mobile phones we keep close to us at any time of day and night. Increasingly, Western leaders perceive China not only as a huge market for our own products, and not only as an increasingly sophisticated competitor, but more and more also as a security threat. When it comes, for example, to the spying abilities associated with the internet and newest 5G technologies. The United States has reacted and has started the biggest trade conflict of this millennium with China. And it's not only about trade and competition, it's about international rules, and it's about political power. And Europe? We are here today to look at the newest developments on our continent, and especially Greece, of course, and with the help of selected international and domestic experts to assess the impact of growing Chinese influence in Greece and in Europe. I want to thank all the speakers who came from near and far to participate in the discussion today. I want to express my gratitude to our partners from the Institute of International Economic Relations for their initiative and the very smooth cooperation until now. I want to thank, of course, my team and Lefteris Petropoulos for making it happen here today. And on a final note, I want to say that if you want to share your impressions about the event and about your feelings about China, we have my colleague Clemens Vogt who's here, and we'll make short interviews in the coffee break if you want, and we will publish that if you want. Thank you all, and I wish us all a public and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your welcoming remarks. It is now my pleasure to introduce you the speakers of our first panel. I have here with me today Dr. Mathieu Duchatel, Director of the Asia Program at the Instituut Montaigne. I have Dr. Frans Paul van der Putten, Senior Research Fellow at the Netherlands Institute for International Relations, Klingendel. Matthias Scheffer, Director of the China Office of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. And Acting Professor Dr. Wan Li, Professor of Economic Studies at the Institute of East Asian Studies and the Mercator School of Management at the University of Duisburg-Essen. We'll start off with some brief initial remarks by our speakers, and then hopefully, if we have time at the end, we'll open up the floor so that we can have a few questions and a discussion. Our first speaker will be Dr. Mathieu Duchatel.
Thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and the Institute of International Economic Relations for having me. I'm starting this panel discussion, so I thought I would give some overview to the issue we are discussing today. I'm not planning to discuss Chinese investment in Piraeus in depth. There have been excellent reports published by Frans Paul here with me, and also Plamen Tonchev and his colleagues. I'm going to give you an overview of the discussion in Europe regarding the strategic consequences of the growing portfolio of Chinese overseas ports, including in Europe. On the left hand, the picture you can see is the port of Shanghai, which is today's largest container port by traffic. It's 40 million TEU. In 1996, it was only 2 million TEU. So you can see the growth of the traffic in Chinese international ports. And on the right-hand side, you have a photo of the port of Hambantota in Sri Lanka, which is one of the most controversial Chinese investment overseas when it comes to ports, and which led to the concept or the notion of debt diplomacy. I put these two pictures because they kind of give a scope to the discussion. On the one hand, you have the growing expansion of China's international trade, and on the other hand, you have a lot of discussions regarding the strategic consequences, and in particular, the strategic intentions of some Chinese overseas port investment. What is clear is that there are two main drivers to the growth of China's investment in overseas ports. One of them is very simply the change of scale of Chinese economy and trade. And the other one is, on the political and strategic side, the debate in China regarding the strategic position of China in the world and how this discussion has changed, in particular in recent years, under the leadership of Xi Jinping. So what I want to do in the 10 minutes that I have is to go a little bit deeper into the three sorts of Chinese investment in overseas ports that can be actually discussed. Number one is financial investment. You have Chinese companies taking stakes in overseas ports, sometimes with management rights, as it's the case here in Greece. Then the second main area, which really gets a lot of international attention and media attention because of the very big scale tickets that we are talking about, is the area of greenfield investment. We are talking of, I will give you some examples of new ports being built with Chinese investment. And the third area, which I will briefly review, is the discussion regarding naval bases, because I think that this has to be connected to the strategic discussion on Chinese investment in overseas ports. So to start with, on the strategic intention, I want to be very brief on that, but I think it's important to remind everyone that there is a very clear roadmap that has been issued by Xi Jinping during the 19th Party Congress, when he issued his work report to the 19th Party Congress, which is in fact the best document we have when it comes to analyzing what are the Chinese strategic intentions over the long term. I want to be quick on that, but I think that the key concept, in the sense that it marks a break from the past, is the notion of leadership. Leadership is the word that was completely banned from Chinese foreign policy under previous leaders. Deng Xiaoping said actually exactly the opposite. He said, never take leadership as a guiding principle of Chinese foreign policy. And now under Xi Jinping, for the first time, you have a stated objective for China to become a global leader by 2050, Horizon 2050, global leader in terms of composite national strengths and international influence. I think it's important to have this in mind when you look at the expansion of global Chinese investment, because it's part of a strategic project to change the footprint of China on the world. But on the other hand, the second driver of China's port investment overseas is simply the scale of Chinese blue economy. The State Oceanic Administration, which is the government agency in China that coordinates the Chinese maritime policy, has its estimate of China's blue GDP. It's 10,000 billion US dollars. It includes everything. It includes, of course, port activities, but also shipping, offshore oil and gas, maritime finance, tourism, maritime transportation, fisheries, etc., etc. But when you aggregate all these numbers, this would make just China's blue GDP the world's 15th largest economy, approximately the size of the Mexican economy. And China has plans to go further in the development of its maritime economy, which represents about 10% of China's GDP. So you have these two drivers when you look at China's expanding global footprint in terms of overseas port investment, the strategic thinking regarding the place of China in the world by 2050, and the gradual expansion of China's blue economy. Now, when you look at the actual port investment by China's two main companies, COSCO and China Merchant Groups, the portfolio of COSCO by 2018 was a portfolio of 36 ports worldwide, and if you combine their total output, that would make the aggregation of the total output of the world's fourth largest ports, 3 of them being Chinese, and the third being Singapore. So for COSCO, it's really a sizable share of its global output, because we're speaking of more than 30% of the total of COSCO's output that is managed in overseas ports. It's a very large portfolio, but when you go a little bit in more precise terms in COSCO's overseas terminal portfolio, what I think is interesting to have in mind is the fact that only 4 ports have a majority stake by COSCO, and all of them are in Europe. You have Piraeus, you have Zeebrugge, you have Valencia, and the third one is Abu Dhabi, which is clearly not in Europe. But most of the majority of COSCO's port investment is a number of minority stakes, and it makes a difference when you think of the influence of the company on the government on the governance of the port. When you look now at China Merchants Ports portfolio, it also does have a big portfolio, even though it's not as sizable as COSCO. And most of the portfolio, it has results of one single acquisition, which is the acquisition of the port management company called Terminal Link, which was previously fully owned by the French shipping company CMA CGM, which gives a stake to China Merchants Group in a very large global portfolio with a concentration in Europe. So these are not new ports. These are really about purchasing stakes in existing ports, and in some very rare cases, there are 4 majority stakes. There are clearly a lots of positive things about these investments, but it's more my kind of role or my perspective to talk about the policy challenges for Europe. And I think that to summarize and really to start a discussion about this, I would just highlight 2 aspects in terms of possible risks for Europe if the portfolios of the main 2 Chinese companies in Europe continue expanding in the coming years, and there are discussions regarding possible investments in other ports such as Barcelona, or there are many possibilities, and there is an intention on the part of COSCO and China Merchants Group to keep on expanding. I think risk number 1 is the risk of managed competition. When you are a shipping company, you do have the choice of which ports you will use as your hub for regional operations, and it really raises a lot of questions if, for example, the portfolio of COSCO continues expanding. For example, one question would be, when you see the ambitions of cities like, let's say, Churchill in Algeria, or other ports in the Mediterranean Sea, how many hubs for the Mediterranean, and how is a Chinese company going to organize regional trade within the Mediterranean region when it has the capacity to actually choose? So it decreases the bargaining power of the ports in question. Second question, because COSCO is a shipping company, and other shipping companies are not always major port operators. So there's a question of competition among shipping companies. And if you take, for example, the French company CMA CGM, well, it has Terminal Link, but it doesn't have as many investment, and it doesn't own majority stakes in overseas ports. So in terms of competition among shipping companies, there is an impact of the acquisition of stakes in overseas ports that COSCO and China Merchants Group are making. And then there is a third question, which is more long-term, but which is really becoming mainstream in the policy discussion in Europe, which is the competition in terms of access to data. When you have management stakes in a port, you have access to a lot of data which help optimize your global operations, and this is also part of the global competition. The second aspect is purely political. It's the question of leverage and influence, and how states across the world are going to preserve their autonomy of decision making in link to their critical infrastructure. And I want to be quick on that because I don't have that much time. But I think there's a question of what is excessive leverage and how can European unity be maintained when there are very important stakes in equities that are extremely important strategically for the states in question. I think everyone knows about the discussions regarding the European position at the Human Rights Council. This is really a question that will rise again in the future. And then there is a second issue, and it's about port investment, but it's about critical infrastructure in general, and I think it's at the heart of the discussion that is taking place in Europe regarding 5G infrastructure, which is the extent to which there is a neutral space in the US-China confrontation. And if you think in terms of not tomorrow, but 2030, and there is a major US-China confrontation on one specific issue, how can you maintain a European unity and take a stance between the US and China? I think the issue of critical infrastructure is very much linked to this strategic discussion. You want me to stop here?
No, please.
Okay.
I think we have a couple more minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, then I want to make a quick point on something that really captures the imagination, and I think it captures the imagination wrongly, and it really shapes the discussion on Chinese port investment. These are the big ticket investments that the media really talks a lot about. And I just want to point out that when you take two of the largest tickets investment, it really shows that the real story about Chinese port investment is more about acquiring stakes in existing operational ports rather than building new facilities. And I think it's very important because it creates a lot of misperception to think that what China is doing is actually building new infrastructure that are game changers in the economies of third countries, in particular in developing countries. And I have two examples. Number one is Bagamoyo in Tanzania, which used to be one of these very big scale tickets. And in fact, it's a story that has been going on for 7 years now. A $10 billion investment as part of a very large portfolio of investment, a special economic zone, as is very often the case, which was cancelled by the new Tanzanian president after his election, denouncing very tough conditions that can only be accepted by mad people. I don't want to go into the conditions. We can go into that during the discussion. But it's a very interesting case of a huge scale port investment that was cancelled because of the conditions that were associated to it, including a lease of 99 years, the interdiction of building new port facilities along the coast of Tanzania, etc., etc. I mean, this would have been a port investment that would have completely changed the dynamic of relations between China and Tanzania. And another example is the port of Kyokyu in Myanmar, which has not been cancelled, which has been really scaled down. There's now an intention to build 2 piers and link it to the existing gas pipeline that runs to Kunming in Yunnan province in China. And this is the result of the Hanban-Tota discussion and the decision by the Myanmar government, with very strong assistance, I heard, from the US State Department, to actually rethink the terms of a deal that had been signed as an MOU between the CITIC group and the Myanmar government. So as a result, you have a division by 6 of the scale of the project. So my point here is that we're talking about stakes in existing ports. We are talking in certain cases of managing operations of the ports. We are talking of business interests, but we're also talking of more than business. And I think that's my last point, because I don't want to be too long, but we can get back to that in the discussion. This is very much about business. And when you hear, for example, Xu Lijong from COSCO explaining why COSCO invests so much in ports, the main argument that comes is because it's really profitable compared to shipping. It's much more stable than shipping. Shipping, the profits fluctuate as a result of the price of oil, for example, and there are many reasons why the profits of shipping fluctuate. port management is a very profitable operation, and it makes complete sense for a company like COSCO to expand its portfolio of ports from that perspective. But it's also not only about business activities. I think that when you speak to other actors in the shipping business or in the port business, it's clear that their perception is that there is an intention by the largest Chinese conglomerates to actually completely kill the competition over the long term. I think it's very clear from what I hear from many stakeholders in the field. And it's also inseparable from the strategic intentions of China and the roadmap that has been presented by Xi Jinping to the 19th Party Congress. So this needs to be, I think, discussed in a kind of comprehensive way rather than in terms of very specific investment in specific ports. I think I can stop here and...
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dusatel, for this very interesting speech of yours. Our next speaker will be Dr. Frans Paul van der Putten, Senior Research Fellow at the Netherlands Institute for International Relations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and I will make some introductory remarks without using PowerPoint. And my introductory remarks I will focus on the connection between the Chinese investment in Piraeus on the one hand and the implications for the, let's say, the strategic implications for EU-China relations on the other hand. And there are three main things that I would like to say about this linkage. The first of all, and the most important thing, is that because of this Chinese investment, the region becomes more important. So the role of the region, Greece, but also Eastern Mediterranean and Southeast Europe, in Europe, EU-China relations becomes more prominent. Second, this brings along with it opportunities and risks both for the European side. And third, this then in turn brings along a need for the European Union to undertake certain actions. So these are the 3 points, and I would briefly like to explain all of the 3 points. Starting with why is it so that the region is becoming more important because of this Chinese investment? First of all, we're talking about strategic implications of Chinese investment in the port of Piraeus. So the two main crucial aspects of this Chinese investment is, first of all, the long-term contract that the agreement that was made in 2008 between COSCO and the Piraeus Port Authority and the Greek government for the company to operate part of the container port. So it's a long-term involvement. And the second, of course, is the majority stake that COSCO acquired in 2016 in the Piraeus Port Authority. So because of these two elements are at the core of what constitutes a long-term involvement of the company in the port of Piraeus. Having said that, I think it's important also to notice that this does not imply that the port of Piraeus is for COSCO is completely unique, or that COSCO's attention is exclusively in the region or in Europe as a whole is exclusively focused on Piraeus. As we have just seen in Mathieu's overview, there are plenty of other European ports where COSCO also has investments. Most of them are minority stakes, but there are even some cases also where COSCO has a majority stake in a container terminal, not in the Port Authority. That is unique, that is only Piraeus, but still. This implies that the company has a strong focus or a strong commitment to further commercial development of Piraeus, but at the same time the company is also open for further activities and developing its involvement in other European ports as well. So for why is this then important for EU-China relations? I think it's important because it's so important for China, at least for 3 reasons. First of all, the COSCO's involvement in Piraeus is an indicator of the viability of the Belt and Road Initiative. in Europe, but I think also generally globally. As we have seen in international media, or as we have just heard from the presentation by Mathieu, the Belt and Road Initiative, even only the maritime dimension of the Belt and Road Initiative involves a lot of projects that Chinese companies are undertaking in many parts of the world. There have been many questions, there has been a lot of criticism, a lot of doubts about these projects. The quality and the characteristics of the projects are very different in each case. And I think for the Chinese government it's very necessary to have at least a number of projects that can be regarded as successful or on the way to becoming successful projects. So from this point of view, I think COSCO's involvement in Piraeus is one of the best examples that the Chinese government to date can show to the world and say that China can be very helpful in to other countries and local companies with its Belt and Road Initiative. So it's an indicator of the viability of the BRI. It's also, I think, the foundation for Chinese long-term plans to develop better access to and from Central European markets through the southeastern part of Europe. So building on this foothold that COSCO has in Piraeus, the company is trying to develop the so-called Land Sea Express route, so a network of other trade corridors that connect Piraeus with destinations in Central Europe, going through the Western Balkans, but also via the Adriatic Sea. This is also, I think, a very important long-term objective of China. And the third one, I think, for China is also that Piraeus is a showcase that COSCO, but also China in general, can use to say also to other countries, look what we have done in Greece. We have dramatically increased the transshipment rate of Piraeus because of our involvement, and perhaps this is something that we can also do for your country and for your port. So it's also something that China can use in its relations with other European countries. I think, and the reason why this is so important for China is that I believe that one of the long-term objectives of the Chinese government with the Belt and Road Initiative, or even without the Belt and Road Initiative, even if the BRI would not have existed, it is to increase the role of Chinese companies in China's overseas economic trade relations. So both the transport corridors and also in the overseas markets. So one of the main overseas markets for China clearly is the European Union, and therefore also the trading corridors between the EU and China are of great strategic importance. So China, I think, for China, all these things are very important, and therefore the Chinese involvement in the Port of Piraeus also becomes an important issue in EU-China relations overall. Certainly because it increases the role of the region in this bilateral relationship. I think I'm thinking of in particular of two aspects. One, the increasing importance of the Mediterranean as a hub region in trade between Europe and China, but also between the east coast of the United States and China. This means this has important implications, obviously, for the European Union as a whole. It means that the economic importance of the Mediterranean region is increasing. The other thing is the geopolitical side. It also means that Southeast Europe and the Mediterranean, the East Mediterranean, this region is potentially becoming a stage for great power competition, because we see clearly, I think on a daily basis, the very, very strong reaction that China's growing economic influence in the world is triggering, especially in the United States. Certainly not exclusively in the United States, there are also many other countries that are responding to China's rise as a great power. But the United States response is the most notable one and the most, I think, fundamental one. And from this point of view, wherever those regions that are becoming strategically important for China are automatically also becoming strategically relevant for the United States, and therefore this is also something that the European Union has to deal with. So the assessment from the EU perspective is that, like I said, there are both opportunities and risks. I think the opportunity side is clear. It's an opportunity for economic development of the region. This idea to strengthen the role of the Mediterranean and Southeast Europe in EU-China trade relations brings along potential for development. On the risk side, I think there are in particular two risks for the EU to take into account. One is the long-term risk of becoming too dependent on China, becoming too dependent on Chinese actors. So if China's aim indeed is to acquire more influence over the trade relations, the trade corridors between Europe and China, and to acquire more influence over access to the European market as a destination for Chinese goods, then this involves automatically at the same time an increasing dependence on the European side on Chinese actors and the Chinese government ultimately. That's one risk. The other risk is the risk of instability. I also already mentioned there's the potential for increasing great power attention and potential also great power competition that comes along. So this could, of course, bring with it a greater risk of regional instability. Also something I think that is in the long term, from a strategic point of view, very relevant for the European Union. So finally, then, if this all is true, then there are certain actions that I think would be important for the European Union to take, and all this is a very complicated long-term geopolitical matter, but I think we can start with establishing that there are three things that the European Union and its member states as a collective should focus on more specifically because of this. The first one is the need for infrastructure development in the Balkans region, especially in the Western Balkans countries, which are not part of the European Union. There is, of course, already an important involvement financially and economically by the EU in the Western Balkans. But as long as there is a need for infrastructure development that those countries feel that cannot be met from the EU side, and therefore they turn to China for this, then I think there is a need for the EU to keep considering whether there is not more that can be done to meet the need of infrastructure development in that region. The second issue, I think maybe to focus more on, is the importance of the competition situation, the competition landscape in maritime shipping. This relates closely to what Mathieu just said. When it comes down to it, it's not so much the Chinese investment in European ports by itself that brings so much economic or even potential political influence for Chinese state-owned enterprises or for the Chinese government. It's the combination between this kind of investment and the fact that COSCO is a leading player within an alliance with other major maritime container shipping companies. So this particular alliance is called the Ocean Alliance. It's the biggest alliance among in international container shipping. COSCO is the leading player within that alliance. So that means that COSCO has the potential to say to port authorities or to say to countries that if we work together, then if we invest or if we have some kind of collaboration with you, we have the ability to make sure that a lot of container traffic will come to your country or to your port. So the source of COSCO's power then is the competition dynamics that exist among the container carriers at sea. And the third focus issue, I think, is the role for NATO. I think if the European Union in the long term wants to be able to have more leverage over what happens in the geopolitical domain in any region that is important, but we are talking now about Southeast Europe, Eastern Mediterranean region, we have to look at who are the main players and what will happen if there will be increasing, let's say, regional spillover effects from US-China competition, geopolitical competition. And if we look at, we have just, talking about China most of the time here, but in this particular instance, the role of the United States, I think, should also be taken into account. For countries in the region, and I think Greece certainly not in the least respect, the role of NATO is very important. NATO is a major actor that influences regional stability, and that also is an important connection between the region and the United States. My arguing in this point is that if European countries and Europe as a whole want to be able to have more leverage in the geopolitical domain in this region, and NATO is one of the major domains where this takes place, it follows naturally that Europe must achieve for itself a greater role within NATO. And I think one of the difficult but necessary issues to tackle there is the issue of military contributions. It's something that the United States keeps going on about, and many European countries are reluctant for many reasons to increase the military contribution, but I think because of the topic that we are discussing here today is one of the reasons to take another look at NATO and this issue of financial contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Matthias Schäfer, Director of the China Office of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here, colleagues from the Institute and from CAS. It's always good to be back in the core of Europe. Well, actually, I wanted to just to give some impressions about the presentations we just heard, which I found excellent. Thanks for that. To reflect a little bit on the, I think, strategic implication that China is following in having this Belt and Road initiative, or this new Silk Road, as it is called as well, and then reflecting a little bit on some on a point, more fundamentally on a point that has already been mentioned by the two speakers. This role of the Chinese government in strategically investing not only in their own country but as well all over the world, and having an idea of what does really mean this Chinese state capitalism, which is completely different to what we speak about market economy, a social market economy. Henri Bonnet spoke about the values that Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is promoting, and one of these basic fundamental ideas where we establish our policies on is as well the economic and social order. And I think in the end we have to see that we will find some sort of relation to this different economic and social order that China is as well promoting in his investment. Let me start with a more or less a say in China concerning investment and the backbone of this Belt and Road initiative in China. People often say, or you can read it and hear it, before people get rich, we have to invest in infrastructure. So one Chinese conviction of becoming rich and becoming wealthy is you have to, first of all, to build infrastructure, which is a more or less a precondition of becoming rich. So all this initiative and these and all these strategies of the Chinese side, starting with Xi Jinping's vocation for a Belt and Road initiative, which has been in 2012, has a deep root in the fact that Chinese economic approach is deeply convinced that first of all, infrastructure has to be done. So consequently, infrastructure all over the world, not only in China, is the main focus of the strategic approach, not only of the Communist Party and the government, but as well from the Chinese economy. A little bit different to what we do in the European Union as well. You mentioned as well the 2050 approach, or 2049, the 100th year of the founding of the People's Republic of China, where China wants to be the #1 country in the world, and I think we should take this really serious. And it means from now on it's still 25 years, but this is nothing that Chinese people would think about it. It's perhaps too long. I mean, even imagine our political terms in Greece or in Germany or in Brussels. We have at least a perspective of 4 years, or in Brussels of 7 years. We now speak about the new financial framework, and we even think that 7 years is perhaps a little bit long to look into the future. For Chinese people and the government, 25 years is just nothing. It is just that they think about where do we want to stay, what do we want to stand in 2049, and then we think about what does that mean in concreto, step by step, to achieve these goals. And I think that concerning what Franz Paul has said about how could Europe react on what is happening in China, we should as well think about our strategic approaches and think about, is 4 years or 5 years already enough, and are we perhaps a little bit too enthusiastic when we only speak about 4 or 5 years approaches. The second point I wanted to make is, or to highlight a little bit what is behind this strategic approach of China. Well, one idea of these huge investments in the Belt and Road Initiative has to do with the fact that China wants to shift actually wealth and wealth creation from the seaside and the eastern parts of China towards the middle part or western parts of China. You showed this picture of the Shanghai port with all these containers. Well, wealth has been created in Beijing, in Shanghai, and down to Canton and the Pearl River Delta, so all on the seas, but actually remote areas in China have in a way left behind. So one key approach of the Chinese government with this initiative is as well to shift growth and wealth perspectives and job creation from the seaside of China into the middle part of China, and therefore all these construction and all this infrastructure which is heading into the western direction as well bring some sort of economic development as well into the remote areas of China. A next approach is that actually we discuss often about growth numbers in China. We came from 10 or 8%, now we are going into a direction of 6 or 5%, even with the consequences of the coronavirus situation. Well, every single percentage point of reduced growth in China is not only that people do not become as rich as they used to become in the last 20 or 30 years, that means as well that the Chinese government has to be responsible for huge resources that are not used anymore, and they have to think about what are we doing with all these overcapacities in our macroeconomic model when growth rates are going down. And that means as well that actually a Belt and Road Initiative gives them the opportunity to shift resources as well outside of China to invest in Tanzania or in Sri Lanka or in Pakistan and even up to the European Union. So as well, this is a very, very strategic approach to think about how can we actually cope with reduction of growth rates in our internal economy. Then they strengthen as well their relations to their neighbors. Neighborhoods, Myanmar has been said. I mean, it's on the western border of China, and with a very, very intense economic relations. So all these investments do have as well an influence on the way China is assessing their relationship to neighbor countries, to strengthen actually as well these neighbor countries, to trigger some sort of economic development in South Asian countries, which will as well reflect back on the economic perspective of China when they are actually in a situation in which they are trading and doing economy with these countries. You as well mentioned the role of the leadership. I think this is as well a very interesting point. Leadership has always been a very reluctant part of the Chinese international politics. To assess it in a way of bringing it into a relation to economic investment helps as well to reduce a little bit perhaps this risk or this fear that is often linked to the stronger impact that China is trying to assess in the neighborhood countries. And we have to see as well, when we think about coming from our European perspective, where we have 27 member states in the European Union, where we are neighbors, where we are more or less partners or friends, because we share the same idea of a rule of law based approach. China is still on the search for partners and friends. I mean, this is really a lonely country in the world, and they as well reflect on the fact of how can we actually start implementing more stable relation to neighborhood countries up to the European Union, which is as well new in the way they run for it politically. So this is what I wanted to highlight concerning the different strategies that the Chinese government is following with this Belt and Road Initiative, where Piraeus is one part of it. Duisburg, you didn't speak about the most famous part in Germany, the Duisburg, and we have as well someone from there here in the. So it's not only an exclusive Greece or Italian; it is a European topic to assess, to cope with the Chinese investment here. My final point is, and I wanted to go more into the detail of what you highlighted with COSCO, this nature of this company. I think it is very interesting, but as well an unknown area of academic research and as well of political assessment. How can we cope in the European Union with our idea of a market economy, with this feature of a state, capitalistic, state-owned, company-driven capitalism that we are confronted with? You spoke about this hindering of competition. When we have a look at COSCO, I mean, this is not only, you said it, it's not only just a shipping company. It is as well some sort of a management company for managing a port. And what are ports doing? I mean, they are combining the way where you can, on the one hand, use the sea route to bring goods from one part of the world to another, but ports are linking as well the railway to the seaside. So actually, when you invest in ports, you do have both alternatives to take the belt and the roadway, so the seaway or the way via the countryside. And just imagine that when you would ship a container from Shanghai to Rotterdam, for example, it would take you round about 4 weeks. When you could bring this container to the railway, it could be the case that you reduce it for the half of the duration that you need to bring a container then from Shanghai to Rotterdam. Nevertheless, there are some problems, especially in the European Union, when you try to bring the train in Poland to the part of Germany, it's not fitting together. So there you probably lose the biggest time when you try to bring containers via the railroad. But nevertheless, investing in ports is a highly strategic way to assess logistics in a globalized economy, and this is why I think that the Chinese are very, very active in this part. And it's just not only the shipping industry, it's the container industry, it's the port management, it's the whole part of a logistics industry that is in the backbone of investment in ports, and we even speak about financial industries where we need to finance all these investments. So what you can see here is the way that actually where we think in our market economy that different companies should take responsibility for different parts of this business model or this value chain. The Chinese approach is you have it all in one hand. And this hand is even strongly guidelined not only by capital markets or stock holders, but as well by the government and by the party. So, I mean, with all the investment we see now in the European Union, we always have to get a clearer look of how can we, with our idea of a market economy, compete and assess the way the Chinese are building their business model in a much more comprehensive, much more centralized, controlled way that gives them as well some sort of better access to huge public resources that they can as well implement in such investments. And I do think that behind all the technological conflicts that have been risen as well here on the panel already with 5G and all these features which have to do with technological competition, with the security problems and all this. I think the basic conflict or the basic topic that from a political point of view we should highlight much more than we did in the last 20 years is to understand about the Chinese state capitalism and to compare it to our way of doing market economy and to find other ways of, on the one hand, competing, on the other hand, working together. And I think that multilateral organizations like the WTO, for example, would be a very, very good frame or a very good platform to do this. So this is final thought as well, that these experiences that I now got in the last 8 months being in China, that multilateralism from this point of view and understanding better what is their model and what is ours is highly welcome as well to resolve or to reduce political conflicts that are in the backbone of this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schäfer. And excuse me, our last speaker from Duisburg in China, acting professor Dr. Wan Li, professor at the University of Duisburg-Essen. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Distinguished guests and friends, it is my great honor to address you here in beautiful Athens. Actually, it's my first time visiting Athens, and I'm fascinated by the rich culture and history and its beautiful scenery. And I think that there is nothing more beautiful than Athens on the world. And also, I want to thank you to the organizers for the kind invitation. And today I'm going to present some findings from my recent research on the impacts of the Belt and Road Initiative projects on European cities. And from our previous speakers, we have already learned that the Belt and Road Initiative projects has already caused a lot of impacts on local economic activities in Europe. But how big are those impacts? And what are the causal effects of the BRI projects is still something that is understudied. And this is the focus of our project. And before I present the results, I first would like to review some of the economic theories together with you, since I am an economist. So I think that generally speaking, economists think that the infrastructure investment has a very important role in promoting economic growth. I think economists from Adam Smith to Karl Marx to Hayek, all of them think that the infrastructure investment go hand in hand with economic growth. And there are various channels where the infrastructure can have an impact on real economic activities. For example, an enhanced transportation infrastructure network can make the shipping of goods cheaper and faster, and thus can create more trade. And this will also generate an incentive for firms to locate their production and service operations in the low key of those new infrastructure projects. So new business will be created, but not only new business will be created, the efficiency of the existing business can also be created because local firms can import their intermediate goods at a cheaper costs and sell their final products at a higher costs. And thus, this will increase the profit of the firms and also increase more employment. And therefore, the local company, local government can also have higher tax revenue, and then the government can have a higher capacity to promote public goods like education and healthcare, which in turn plays a very important role to increase local productivity. And note that this is also an iterative process. It will repeat again and again, and this is also to generate some positive feedback that can increase real economic growth. And that is actually the thing that triggers this positive feedback loop is infrastructure investment. And that is why the multilateral development institutions in the world, such as World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, put so much emphasis on the important role played by infrastructure investment. And actually last year, the World Bank published a report on the estimation of the potential impact of the BRI projects on the world economy. And according to their estimation, by the year of 2030, if fully implemented, the BRI transportation infrastructure can reduce travel time by up to 12%. And also, it will increase trade and increase the real income of the countries along the Belt and Road by 1.2 to 3.4%, and thereby could contribute to lifting around 7 million people out of extremely poverty. So you can see that it has a significant impact. But note that the estimation from the World Bank is based on the future. So it's a prediction of the future. It's not about what really happened. And our research focus on what effects the BRI projects has already generated. And for example, in our research, we look at whether the Chinese investment in Piraeus have already generated some impact on trade costs, therefore increase the local total traffic at the port of Piraeus, and whether this has already generated some spillover effects not only in Piraeus but also in its neighboring regions, such as the Arctic region, and also whether the investment has created new employment at the extensive and intensive margin, and how big are those effects. And our estimation is based on the synthetic control method, and this is a relatively new method proposed by a group of political scientists to study the effect of a single policy. For example, what was the effect of German unification on Western Germany? And note that in situation like this, there is only one treated group, so the traditional regression-based methods cannot be used. And then the synthetic control method actually provides an apples-to-apples comparison in the sense that it tries to generate an artificial version of the treated group and then compare the actual outcome with the prediction generated by the synthetic control. And then you can see the causal effect. And in other words, the synthetic control allows us to use the following algorithm to create an artificial version of Piraeus, and the artificial version of the Piraeus looks identical to the real Piraeus, except that it did not receive the Chinese investment, the COSCO investment in 2009, since 2009. And then we compare what has happened in reality with the artificial version of the Piraeus. Then we can see what are the causal effects of Chinese investment on the economic activities in Piraeus. So this is the intuition of the method. And now let's have a look at the results of the estimation. So this figure shows you the effects on local employment. The solid line represents the actual Piraeus. And the dashed line represents the artificial, the fake Piraeus that we generated. And from this figure, we can see that if without Chinese investment, then the employment in Piraeus in 2015 would be around 182,000. And however, the real employment in Piraeus in 2015 was 186,000. So it means that the Chinese investment in 2009 has caused an increase in local employment of around 4,000 persons. And also from the figure, you can see that the Chinese investment started in 2009, but the positive effects started to emerge after 2012. And this figure shows you the estimation on the effects on maritime freight. And this figure not only shows you the maritime freight in Piraeus, but also exactly on the Arctic region, because we also want to test whether it has some spillover effects to its neighboring regions. And from this figure, you can see that without Chinese investment, the maritime freight in the Arctic region in 2015 would be around 42 million tons. And the real maritime freight in the Arctic region in 2015 was around 70 million tons. So it means that the Chinese investment in Piraeus has caused the maritime freight in this region increased around 22 million tons in 2015. And also from this figure, you can see that the positive effects started to emerge after around 2011, 2012. So from the above results, we can carefully conclude that so far the Chinese investment in Piraeus has already generated some significant positive effects on local economic activities. Especially, it has a very strong effect on maritime freight and also has some small positive effect on local employment. But note that the Belt and Road Initiative, generally speaking, is still at the beginning stage. The Chinese government call it a century project, so it's still at the beginning stage. And there are a lot of projects are in the pipeline. For example, the Chinese and the Greek government just agreed on a €6 million investment project here in Greece, and also China is working on developing the land-sea express routes via the Balkans. So as time goes by, we can expect that the BRI projects can generate an even higher impact on local economic activities. Thank you.